Whiteout Shakespeare, Part 2 of 3 by Robert Boog. How Honor, Asbies, and the Comedy of Errors help answer the Shakespeare authorship mystery. Hi, my name is Robert Boog. In this video, we will talk about number 1, John Shakespeare's crooked scheme, number 2, globes and maps for the Comedy of Error, and number 3, were cities and names from the Comedy of Errors random. My website is robertboog.com. Okay, so were cities and names from the Comedy of Errors random? The original source book was the Monachemy. It was based in Epidamnum, Greece, which today is Durrës, Albania. Shakespeare changed its location to Ephesus, Turkey. Here's a map from that time period, and it's really difficult to see, but this is Sicily, this is Italy, and over here is Greece. A better map, this one is from 1579, it appears. Shows Sicily here. And this is Greece. This would be modern-day Turkey. And you can see how close Sicily is to Africa here. The best map of Greece from 1592 shows the Golfo de Lepanto here. But it's really hard to see any of the cities mentioned in the Comedy of Errors. Maps of the 16th century were inaccurate and distorted. Again, we can look at the North Pole, South Pole, and Africa's location to Sicily here. Ortelius Atlas of 1592. Here's a closer view of Sicily and Africa, Italy and Greece. So finally, this map is from 1702, and finally we can see the three cities. This is Syracuse in Sicily. We have Corinth here in Greece, and Ephesus is over here. Now if you notice, there are latitude lines on the sides, and if we go over to the 38th parallel, there's Ephesus. The 37th parallel has Corinth, and the 36th is Syracuse. Up at the top here, I marked a city, and we'll talk about it in a second. Because the twins, Antipholus of Syracuse and Antipholus of Ephesus, there's no city named Antipholus. So why name the twins Antipholus? Anti means against, and pholus means brightness, so they were kind of in the dark. Antipholus kind of looks like the name of a Greek city named Amphipolis. So let's look at, to give you a better view, again, this is the old map, the Golfo de Lepanto here. So let's see on a modern day map. This is Corinth here. Oops. And you can see it's no longer the Gulf de Lepanto, it's the Gulf of Corinth. And here's Corinth. There's Athens. Ephesus is not on this map, but it's south of Izmir. And then way over here is Syracuse, in this is Sicily here. Now remember how I said that the original Epidamnum had changed to Durrës. So we have Durrës, Syracuse, and Corinth, so it makes a triangle kind of. Here's modern day Ephesus, if you want to see what Ephesus looked like in the past. Okay, the 1592 Molyneux globe. William Cecil received a big brand new Molyneux globe in 1592. He kept it at his house. It was the first globe made in England. What's interesting is, in the Comedy of Errors, Act 3, Scene 2, Nell the kitchen wench is described like a globe. Dromio of Syracuse says, "No longer from head to foot than from hip to hip. She is spherical. Like a globe, I could find out countries in her." And Antipholus of Syracuse says, "In what part of her body stands Ireland? Marry, sir, in her buttocks. I found it out by the bogs." And of course there's a famous pun here when he talks about countries. It's a pun on the word cunt. A terrestrial globe in 1592 was not found in schools. It cost around $1,800 in today's money. The first English-made globe was gifted to Cecil in 1592. So did Shakespeare need a globe to write the Comedy of Errors, considering the crude maps of his time? I dusted off my globe from the garage, and it's still hard to see, even on a modern globe, where these locations are. But Shakespeare's mapping is surprisingly accurate. Here's what I mean. Using my iPhone, Syracuse is on the 37th latitude, Corinth is on the 37th, and Ephesus is on the 37th. Amphipolis is on the 40th latitude line. So when we look at them, again, this map is from 110 years later, and they look like modern GPS shows 3 cities are on the same parallel, but a map from 1702 does not show this. This map is from 1617, and again we see Africa almost touching Spain, and Syracuse close to Africa. Were you aware that latitude lines change slightly over distance? Here's the 37th parallel, the same parallel. It's just south of Richmond, Virginia, and south of San Francisco, and several states in the U.S. use it as a border, it looks like. So if we use Amphipolis as a city here, we can make the triangle just like the one found in monogamy. But correctly calculating latitude lines involves trigonometry. Lawrence Nowell, a cartographer, was the Earl of Oxford's tutor. Nowell left England when Francis Bacon was 2 years old. But remember William's rigorous Latin education? They didn't study history, they didn't study mathematics, they didn't study geography, they didn't study science, right? Would a trip to Italy help in writing the Comedy of Errors? Or might a trip to Italy plus math for mapping beat a map made 110 years later? The character names seem to be inspired by this Italian trip. Aegean was named after the Aegean Sea that lies between Greece and Turkey. Aemilia, there's a town in central Italy called Aemilia. Adriana, the Adriatic Sea. But what about Luciana and Dromio? Well, there is a village called Dro, not far from Venice. So Dromio could mean my Dro. What about Luciana? Saint Lucy is the patron saint of Syracuse. Syracuse, Sicily. Here's the city of Dro. If it's my Dro, he was Dromio of Syracuse and Dromio of Ephesus. But there are no records of William Shakespeare ever leaving England. No proof Shakespeare, Bacon, Neville, or Marlowe ever visited Sicily, but Edward de Vere, Edward Webb, recalled Oxford excelling in a jousting tournament at Palermo, Sicily. Here's Palermo, and here's Syracuse. We will talk more about Sicily in part 3 of Sicily, taken not too long ago. Okay, moving on. Scholars have taught that John Shakespeare mortgaged Asbies. I claim it was a sale. You're probably still skeptical about this too, aren't you? Remember how I said I didn't mention one thing? Well, for over 400 years, John Shakespeare has convinced people that a cart should go before a horse. It's true. Things only make sense if Asbies was a sale. Because John Shakespeare borrowed £40 in 1578. But if it was a mortgage, why did he make a crappy lease before he got the £40? Before borrowing £40 from Edmund Lambert, John Shakespeare leased Asbies to George Gibbs for 21 years, with the payment in animal grain, not cash. For one house on 50 acres, John charged George Gibbs 8 bushels of mixed grain per year. The lease term was for 21 years. How much was the grain worth? It says mixed grain was worth 2 to 4 shillings. That puts it at 3 shillings per bushel. 3 shillings times 8 bushels would be 24 shillings a year. Times 21 years, he would net £28. Nice guy. John Shakespeare and his wife and George Gibbs also went to court where they got the court to issue a fine where it says Webb and Hooper. So they quitclaimed to Webb and Hooper and to the heirs of Webb, and they granted a reversion and rented back to John and Mary Shakespeare and the heirs of Mary. I think John Shakespeare's mother was named Webb, and the mother of Mary Shakespeare, her last name was Hooper. That's what I think happened. But before John met Edmund, the Court of Common Pleas issued a fine. We're told that John Shakespeare's lease terms were as crooked as a ram's horn. This is Charles Edward Phelps. Peculiar, said James Halloway Phillips. Are people who do crooked things honorable? No. Would a 21-year lease paid in grain make Asbies easy to sell? No. And people have been confused in the past. The existence of a fine immediately before the 1578 mortgage. They confirmed the lease of 21 years. A crappy lease means a crappy value. If Edmund Lambert tried to sell Asbies, he would most likely get less than the £40 due to the lengthy lease paid with animal grain. He was stuck with it. So John Shakespeare's crooked scheme, sell high, buy low. He sold it for £40, hoping to repurchase Asbies for £28 or less from his son, because he would tell him that's all it's worth. Hey, but that's 30% off, right? Yes. Now, do you recall there were 2 messuages or 2 houses? We know George Gibbs rented out one house. The other house sat empty for 3 or 4 years. Then in 1584, Edmund Lambert and his wife moved in. In 1587, Edmund Lambert died, and his son, John Lambert, inherited the house and moved in, but he refused to sell it to John Shakespeare. That's what I think caused the 1589 lawsuit. The house on 4 acres was not rented for 3 to 4 years. Why? Would you move into a house that you just sold? No. But would you move into a house you just mortgaged? Yes, of course. From the University of Nottingham in the UK, Elizabethan mortgages, they say in bargain and sale mortgages, the date for repayment is usually given as 1 year from the date of the mortgage. However, this does not mean exactly what it appears to say. Many properties remained mortgaged for years or even decades because the mortgagor John Shakespeare, was unable or unwilling to pay back the principal sum and redeem the mortgage. Foreclosures during Shakespeare's time often took years. The fact that John Shakespeare did not come up with the entire amount in 1 year would not persuade a judge or jury that he should be evicted. Most mortgagees were forced to accept partial payments from their mortgagors. Possession as 9/10 of the law is a key to understanding this case. By not occupying the house on 4 acres, the Shakespeares forfeited all rights they might have had as Lambert's deadbeat mortgagor. Who won John Shakespeare's 1589 lawsuit? Shakespeare believers infer that it is impossible to know. They will tell you, unfortunately, the decision of the court is lost. But in 1589, the owner of Asbies remained John Lambert. Did John Shakespeare deserve a coat of arms? This is the end of Part 2. Be sure to view Part 3 to see how the Shakespeare authorship is unmasked.